Being a professional isn't about the money you make, the position you hold, your level of expertise, or fame. It's the motivation and the attitude you bring to your work. A desire for always learning and improving, and balancing your creative output with getting the business done. Welcome and join the Creating Pros. Hi, and welcome back to Creating Pros. I'm Jim Nettles. I want to start this week with a quote that has been coming to mind for me a lot as of late. And if you are a fan of science fiction, even if you're not, you've probably seen it come up a lot again over the last couple of years with the resurgence and everything with Dune and the films that have come back out. And this is probably the best known quote, and we hear this a lot, and I've been kind of ruminating on this. And the quote is, "I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. And when it has gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear is gone, there will be nothing, only I will remain." Now, over the weekend, I've been doing some prep for the last couple of weeks because over the weekend I was at a convention and had the pleasure of being on stage to talk about the 40th anniversary of David Lynch's version of the Dune movie. And it was one of those things of, okay, great, I need to get brushed up. And there was a little bit of fun there of getting a little bit of side eye because I said my minor contribution to the Dune universe was writing an essay piece about fairy films and how Dune was fairy folklore. And then I talked to him afterwards about it. We were having a little bit of fun with that. But over the weekend, as usual, did a lot of panels and stuff at a convention. And as we were going through and looking at and talking about everything, and this is a very consistent theme I hear a lot of the time. I was in a panel. We were talking about how to use blogging in terms of the business. I was in a panel talking about getting started with podcasting and video casting. Was in a couple of panels around writing and tech. Was even in a panel talking about skepticism versus believers on the paranormal track. And there's a very consistent theme, and it's not just this convention, it's all the time. It's conventions, it's clients I talk to, it's people I work with. And I know I've talked about this a lot, is that notion of fear and how fear very often is the thing that holds us back. It is the thing that stops us from doing the things that we need to when we need to do them. It's one of those things that I think that if we learn to manage fear is one of the most important things we can ever possibly do in life. Was going through and reading a book very recently talking about the rise of anxiety and the rise in the increasing levels of anxiety in culture. When we look at generational anxiety, when we look at how this is becoming way more pervasive about what the challenges are we have to face. And as creatives, we know that fear, anxiety is often seen as a driver for the creative output. It's those things that we are trying to process that make their way into the page, make their way into the artwork, into the music, because it's one of the most powerful emotions that we have. But it's more than just an emotion, it's a very biologically driven reaction. And this is one of those things where I think we often forget the fact of what is the purpose of fear. Why do we get into that fight or flight reaction? It's that moment that says, this might be something that brings risk or danger to me, to my friends, my family, my business, whatever the case may be. And often what happens that anxiety comes from is that hyper fear of everything, even things that don't present an active and real threat, or even a long-term threat. They don't really present a risk, but it's something that we develop a fear of. And trying to come across ways to manage fear manage anxiety, manage making decisions based on taking what we perceive to be the safest path, is always one of those things that we have to look at in the face. And the reason I think that this quote so often gets used in mindset books, it gets used in memes and quotes, is because there's a lot of power here about that notion of, okay, fear is just the thing you have to look at, you have to face it, and you've got to move past it. Because there is that notion that fear of a thing is worse than the thing itself. And I would say that this is almost always true. We have fear about how things are going to be perceived. We have fear about how things are going to be handled. We have fear of what happens if we fail. On panel, one of the couple of panels I was on, again, the notion of failure comes up so frequently. And again, my belief around that notion of failure is not the notion that failure is bad. In fact, I really am less and less inclined, and I really, over time, have gotten to like that word less and less. Because again, failure only comes when we don't learn from the experience. Because generally we regard failure as being it didn't go to plan, I didn't get what I wanted from it, up to, it blew up in my face and everything else. But the most successful people I know are the ones that look at something, and when you go to tackle something, an idea, a task, whether it's something like I'm doing a book project, I'm doing a piece of art, something creatively, I'm trying a new business, I'm trying a different approach to something, I'm going to go talk about something I may have not ever done before. I'm going to try to go develop a new experience. I'm trying to go develop a new skill set. Fear often is the thing that stops us from getting the lesson out of what we were trying to get from the new experience, from the new adventure. Because what happens is that we allow fear to tell us failure is bad. To me, failure can only be defined by when we don't learn from the lesson. I saw this, and I know a lot of you have heard me say this before, but I saw this on a shirt years ago, and I have been stealing it ever since. But it was that I don't fail. I either win or I learn. Now, to me, the calorie I've added to that is I win, I learn, or hopefully I do both. But the most developmental, the most fundamentally changing experiences we can go through, the greatest growth we can go through, is when something doesn't go to plan. Doesn't mean we failed. It means that we maybe didn't account for something. Often it's something we couldn't have planned for. We wouldn't have known. We wouldn't have expected. And all of these things, none of this is bad. Sometimes the implications are unpleasant. Sometimes the implications are problematic. But again, the notion of trying to go and experience new things, take a new approach, try something you haven't done before is a massive part of the human experience. And it's something that most of us learn to fear. Because over time, when we're young, you try anything. You can kind of go dive at anything. You don't have enough experiences not to try something. And because of that, you go diving head forward. And often for those people who have that encouraged, that becomes a lifelong path of go for it, take a shot at it, just keep doing it. The problem is often the fears we hold are not our own. The fears we hold come from the people that raised us, that we grew up around. It's from the people that are around us even now, because people they fear the failure. And because they want to project that, they fear that notion that they don't want to see you fail. And because of that, they then will layer on top of that saying, oh, I wouldn't do that. I would never do that. I've heard that said to me in workshops. when I have talked about here's how you can approach doing things. Here's how you can go chase it. Here's how you can build the business, build the creativity, build what you're needing to do. And I have said that there are things that sometimes you have to do and tackle. And I've had people sitting in an audience, had it happen this weekend, come and say, "Oh, I would never do that." Sometimes I've said, "Hey, yeah, it's a holiday weekend. We're in working, we're in doing the things we need to do." It's like, "Oh, no, no. Well, that's a holiday weekend. I'm going to go take it off." Well, if you're a business owner, that's a choice you have to make is, do you take the time off because you need to, because it's beneficial, because you need to go to spend the time with family and friends? Or is that time you're not investing in something that you're more passionate about? And there's no right or wrong answer here. But there's sometimes that you have to make these challenging decisions because the most valuable thing that we have is the time that we have to spend where we want to spend it and where we need to spend it. So how do we go about this process of handling fear? How do we go about the process of allowing the fear to pass over us and through us? How do we allow ourselves to look at and confront those things that stop us from doing the things that are often the most meaningful to us? Well, the first thing is to take the hit, right? The first step is always, now, this doesn't mean if you have a fear of heights, do like I did when I was in my 20s and go rappelling off the side of a cliff. It helps, but it can be a little bit much. But if you are afraid to try to publish a novel, if you're afraid of showing people your work, well, the first thing to do is to show it. It doesn't have to be good. It doesn't have to be great. All you have to do is show that piece of yourself and express it and understand some people will appreciate it, some people won't. And that fear that often holds us back the most is that idea that somebody won't like something we do. Somebody won't appreciate it. Somebody may poke fun at it online, right? We go into promoting things, we talk about things. Well, the first thing we have to do is confront that fear by taking the small steps. How do I put something out there just to get the feedback? Even knowing that some of it is not going to be positive, some of it's going to be negative, some of it's going to be, maybe it's ridicule, maybe it is just coming in and giving me, giving grief for it. And again, I tend not to pay attention to any of that because it really doesn't mean anything. But if it's coming from those people and that you care about and that supposedly care about you, that becomes a big challenge to handle that kind of feedback. And again, often what we have to remember is what we're seeing and hearing is not really anything more than that person's own fears, biases, concerns. And we will often hear people come and say that, "Oh, I would never do that. I'd never take this risk. I'd never do that," because they are looking at the fact that you're willing to do something they're not, which is a reflection onto them. It's a reflection that they haven't been willing to take that step. So the first critical thing is just try it. Take a step, take a small step, and see that even if something comes back that is negative or, not what you wanted in the feedback, it'll be fine, and you take the next step. The second big thing we can do to confront and manage fear is recognize that it's two things. There is the biological aspect to it that is triggered when we're in a position of threat. But we have to recognize that often that is triggered because of what our mind tells us. Whether it's coming in saying, "I don't want to do this because." As we get older, as we develop more experience, a lot of the time what experience translates into is, well, we don't necessarily remember the good things and the positive things. We remember the things that hurt, caused embarrassment, caused pain, caused ridicule, whatever the case may be. And so we allow those things to drive us and stop us from taking action. So what I challenge you to do is next time you're taking that step is remember the last time you took that risk. What were the benefits? What were the lessons? What was the good feedback? What was the positive feedback? Because only in that moment can you get the real energy in the move to take the next step forward. Because all of this is about moving the yardsticks. This is about keep moving down the field one step at a time. Not every step has to be the massive win, the massive gain. It's one step at a time. And I think the third and probably the biggest notion of trying to confront fear is that simple memory that fear of the thing is often way worse than the repercussions. Because all too often, if we fear something, either we won't do it at all, which means we don't get the potential benefits, we don't get the lessons, and all we have then are the regrets of not having tried it. If you look at the memoirs, the interviews, if you listen to everything of those people when they reach old age, the only thing that they really have in those regrets are the things they didn't do. It is the exchanges of one thing for another. It was having taken the time to be at a meeting instead of going to a kid's party. It is the notion of that one thing they always wanted to do in life that they didn't. I've heard this from a number of people, that I've worked with and that are in retirement age. They're just now trying to do their first books, their first creative output. They're like, well, when I was a kid or even in college, I was doing X. I was writing and doing all of these things. And then I started a family, started a life, and I've never done this. I'm ready to do this now. And their biggest regret is often, why did I wait so long to now do this? And it's that notion that we allow fear of how people react to what we're doing, how people will receive what we're doing, that just stops us. And it is that regret that will ultimately come by not taking the risk that will be the thing that haunts you way longer than if something doesn't go to plan. Because if something fails, if something doesn't go to plan, there's very few things that you're not going to be able to survive, handle, encounter, and ultimately grow from, and then try the next thing. Because once you discover that you really can survive and learn from pretty much anything, then that is the point at which you're much more empowered to try those things that will be meaningful and life-changing for you, but not only for you, but for those people around you. Because when we surround ourselves with people who are fearful, when we surround ourselves with people who are full of anxiety, when we are in that position and we're listening to those people tell us not to do something, not to try something, not to take a risk, that's really not them. That's really not about us. That's really about them, their fears, and what they're holding themselves back from because they're not willing to take that step. And if you take that step and you're successful, then they see that as reflecting on them. So if you can take those small risks and see those small gains and get those lessons, get those learnings, and move past the times when it doesn't work, then what you'll find is that you're able to then show others that it's okay to learn, to grow, and to move forward. And for those people who don't want to take those risks, who don't want to be part of that life of growth, ultimately you'll find that they fall to the wayside and their opinions never mattered any. So until next week, this has been Creating Pros. I'm Jim Nettles, and find what that little fear is going to be that you're going to take on for the week.